Hey, good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome back to another Faith and Finance. Uh, just trying to get my screens and stuff together. Forgive me, y'all. All right. Welcome back to another Faith and Finance Tuesday. I'm your host, Maureen Adair, and I'm so glad you decided to join us tonight. Hey, we've had a few technical difficulties. We've been on here for about the last 10, 15 minutes just chopping it up. But I'm glad that you are able to join us. And so, we're going to get right back on into what we've been talking about. You guys know over the last several weeks, we've been talking about developing the mind to prosper. And we've been talking about a simple but powerful truth. And before you can change financially, you got to change the way you think, right? And so we've been discussing how prosperity begins with mindset and discipline and developing the habits that position us for long-term success, right? So tonight we're going to continue that conversation from a different perspective. And I'm excited because I have a special guest joining me tonight, Mr. Bob Coleman. So Bob is going to share his experience, his perspective, and some of the lessons he's learned that I believe will encourage all of us as we continue to develop that mind to prosper. So we're going to jump right on in, and everybody, let's welcome Mr. Bob Coleman.
Good evening, sir. How
All
are
right.
you? How are you? How are you?
I am fantastic, fantastic, in spite of all this technology
Hey.
difficulties. Yeah, but you know how that
Mm-hmm.
is. Yeah, they say they want computers to replace people. They can't let it happen. Yep. But now, hey y'all, good evening everybody. If y'all here, we do all the time. Just say good evening. Hello to everybody that's joining us. And again, sorry for all the the difficulties, but we're finna have a good show. We're gonna jump right on in. So, you know, uh, while we was having the technical difficulties, I asked Bob this question. When it comes to that phrase of developing the mind to prosper, what does that means to you? And he was just actually sharing that with us. So, Bob, I'm gonna just turn it back over to you and let you share
Okay.
it
Well, what
again.
does it mean to have a prosperous mind? And it's very easy to say to tell people they have to change their mind. But what the reality of it, Marlon, is really and truly, most people aren't willing to change their mind. One of the things that I teach and
Yep.
train in Bulletproof is we have to learn to get out of your own way. And you have to learn
Mm-hmm.
to accept not your truth, but God's truth, because that's where it all starts. And I'm the first to admit, I've raised both my hands. There was a time when I thought I was right. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
decisions I made, I thought I was right. I was the man, because I was used to being that guy. I was the guy, being in radio, working in radio for over 35 years, being on the radio. I was the guy. And then going from being on the radio to being a police officer, again, I was the guy. But it takes a humbling of yourself. You have to humble yourself and say, you know what, I may not know it all. I may not be correct in some of the things that
Mm-hmm.
I do. And some of the things that I learned may not be correct. And so what you have to do,
Right.
you have to be willing to put down your rocks first and foremost and say, you know what, I'm going to humble myself before God and allow him to and allow the Holy Spirit, which that's the Holy Spirit's job, is to lead us and to guide us to all of God's truth. And that's really the foundation of the changing of the mind. But most people, they don't want to do
Yep. Yep. Yeah. You kind of my next question I was going to ask you was like, what was there a point in your life? But you kind of
that.
answered that when you kind of made that, you know, when you knew that if things was going to change in your life, where it had to start with your mind. Because I know a lot of times people we go out and we start doing just working, and just doing activity, and the activity don't produce what we're looking for, and I think it's we have to identify what the real problem is, and that's the mindset. When did that happen for you?
Well, you know what? To be quite honest with you, transparent with you, it's an everyday, ongoing uh, situation for me. You never reach the end. It's like trying to reach the end of the internet. There's no such thing. You can't be on the
Uh-huh.
internet and all of a sudden you're on the internet one day and all of a sudden the words come up, the end. There's always something else. There's always something new. But I can say that, it started for me a few years ago when I realized again that I may not have the all the right answers. And what you have to do is you have to look at your life and look at the pattern of your life. Look at what you have, look at what you say you want, and then look at the price that you paid to get what you think you wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at all of a lot of what we call celebrities or wealthy people, everybody wants to be wealthy. Wealth to me is not a number.
Right.
Wealth to me is not about having a lot of money. Wealth to me is peace of mind and a healthy body. That's wealth. Because as long as I got peace of mind and a good, strong mindset, and it's set in the right direction, which is uh, the direction of what God wants me to, or I should say, obeying the laws of God's kingdom, because that's what it's all about,
Right.
obeying the laws of God's kingdom. What my goal is daily, my goal is to be the best citizen in God's kingdom as possible. Not perfect, but just the
Mm-hmm.
best citizen.
Yep.
But being born in a democracy, here in America, we don't understand kingdom because we weren't born in a kingdom. We were born in a democracy. And so we have no concept of what it's like or what it means to be born in a kingdom. But that is what God teaches. That is why Jesus
Right.
came here. Jesus came here to restore the kingdom. He didn't come here for religion. He came here to restore the
Mm-hmm.
kingdom and to reclaim his citizens and allow us to become
Right.
citizens if we chose to do so. And once you
Right.
understand that, but before you can understand any of that, you have to have a changing of your mind and your mindset.
Yeah. Yep. 100% agree with you. I'm thinking about sitting here listening to you and thinking about what you do with Bulletproof,
Mhm.
right? And so I know you encounter a lot of people that you kind of talk to, maybe even mentor. What are some of the mindset, I guess, struggles you think most people deal with when it comes to believing in prosperity, or because prosperity gets a bad
Mhm.
name. And I think God wants us to prosper. Like you said, either it's a peace of mind, it's a health, it can be with your family. Prosperity simply means to just grow. But what are some of the mindset beliefs that you have encountered just out talking to people?
Faith, people say the word faith, but they really don't understand what faith is. Faith is when you're doing something and it makes no sense to you. That's faith. If you can
Yeah.
figure it out, if you're doing something that makes sense to you, then you're not operating in faith. You're doing what you think you can do. Faith means to just release yourself and to go in a direction that you have no clue on what it is you're doing. Or better yet, you might have a clue, but it just doesn't make sense. And I can't tell you how many
Right.
times I've found myself. That was really my learning curve. When I found myself consistently in a situation where what I was doing didn't make sense, and people around me, they had no problem telling me that it didn't make sense. The people that were closest to
Yeah.
me, my family members, you name it, my friends, that don't make sense. What you're talking about, it's not going to work. And but because at that time acting in ignorance, being unconsciously incompetent. Unconscious incompetence means when you don't know what you don't know. That's
Right.
unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. And I liken that to when you think about, remember back when you were a little small child and the first time you saw one of your friends or somebody riding a bicycle or the first time you saw a bicycle. You went to your parents, you said, "Oh, mama, daddy, I want a bike. I want a bike. Can I get a bike for Christmas? Can I get a bike for my birthday? I want a bike." At that point in your life, you were unconsciously incompetent because you didn't know what you didn't know. You wanted a bike, but it hadn't dawned on you you didn't know how to ride it. And
No,
and
that's
so the
right.
minute they bought you that bike, they said, "Here's your bike." And it had a big red ribbon on it. You were surprised. And from the moment your hands touched that bike, you went from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. Because
Right.
the minute you touched that bike, you realize, wait a minute, I don't know how to ride it. And so uh,
Mm-hmm.
for in the beginning years, I was unconsciously incompetent because I didn't know what I didn't know. I was just acting in blind, and here comes that word, blind faith. And to my surprise, it worked out for me.
Right.
Go ahead.
What you now gonna say you don't mind breaking down blind faith, go a little deeper with blind faith
Sure.
and faith.
Blind faith. I'll give you a prime example of what blind faith looks like and what it is. Um, when I was living in Albany, Georgia, and I'd applied to work for Magic 108 in St. Louis. And even how that came to be was blind faith, me getting out of my own way. It didn't make sense, how it all came to be. It didn't make sense. And so remember now, I'm sharing this story from hindsight. I'm just sharing this story, what I went through, what I did. I think about it, and I'm like, man, that was nothing but blind faith. And so, because of that, that's why I can be so dogmatic now about bulletproof because I know it works because I lived it.
Right.
And I was living in Albany, Georgia, working at a radio station in Albany, Georgia. And it was one Saturday morning. I woke up, and it was a friend of mine. We worked at WLTH Radio together in Gary, Indiana. Now, I hadn't talked with this friend in years. Matter of fact, we went to high school. We graduated from high school together, and I hadn't talked to her since I had left the radio station in Gary, Indiana. So it had been some years since she and I had talked. I woke up one Saturday morning. Now, at the same time, I'm asking God. I'm telling God that I want to work in major market radio because at that point I was working in
Mm-hmm.
Albany, Georgia. Albany, Georgia is secondary market. It's like the minor leagues and the major leagues in baseball. You got your minor league, you got your farm teams, and then when you get called up to the majors, you play for the Cardinals, with the Cubs. Follow me? And so I was in Albany, Georgia. I was in radio, but it was secondary market. I wanted to work in a major city on a major market radio station. That was my petition to the king. And so the king, being the king, he's going to always suffice and take care of his citizens. That's what a king does. And so I
Right.
woke up one Saturday morning. This makes no sense. I woke up one Saturday morning, and my friend's name was Dana Huskisson. May she rest in peace. But her name was Dana Huskisson. So I woke up one Saturday morning, and I don't know why, but the Holy Spirit just kept bringing Dana to my mind. And I'm like, why am I thinking about Dana Huskisson? I haven't talked to her in years. This makes no sense. So the Holy
Mm-hmm.
Spirit told me, he said, give her a call. Now, again, we hadn't talked in years. There was no Facebook. There was no internet back then, no social media. I had to do it the old fashioned way. And the old fashioned way was I went to one of my closets in my apartment, pulled out an old box, and rumbled through the box to see if I could find the one book, my old telephone book that I had all my old numbers in. And so I did that. Again, this makes no sense. I did that and I called the number and Dana answered the phone. And we hadn't talked in years. Now remember my petition. My petition was to the king, I want to work in major markets. St. Louis is a major market radio station. So I'm talking to Dana
Right.
on the phone and we're catching up and how you doing? And during our conversation, she told me, she said, Bob, she said, I'm a little disappointed. And I said, what are you disappointed in? She goes, well, I just recently applied to work for this radio station in St. Louis, Magic 108, and they turned me down because they're looking to hire a male, not a female. And so we laughed about it. I told, oh, it's going to be okay. Small talk, small talk. So we're catching up. And girl, remember this, and Bob, remember that. And so right before we hung up, I said, Dana, let's not make it another 10 years before you and I speak again. And we laughed. And right before we hung up, the Holy Spirit said, ask her about that radio station in St. Louis. And I said, Dana, I said, what was that station in St. Louis you said you applied for? And she said, oh, she said, Magic 108 in St. Louis. And I said, I'm going to give them a call. And she said to me, yeah. She said, because she was always calling me little darling. Yeah, little darling, give them a call because, they're looking to hire a male, not a female. And so I said, okay, now I was the program director of the station that I was currently working at in Albany, Georgia. Okay, I was the program director. And so being the program director, there's one thing that I know. I don't work on Saturdays as a program director, and no program director works on Saturdays. They're off on the weekends.
Right.
And so Dana, she gave me the number to the radio station in St. Louis, Magic 108. It was Saturday morning. I dialed the number, and it wasn't a program director, but it was Doc Jones. You all know him as Doc Jones.
Doc
Doc
Jones
answered the phone. And I knew Doc Jones from Chicago because Doc Jones, to me, he was one of my radio idols. Doc Jones was the Michael Jordan of radio to me because before I even got in radio, Doc Jones was working in Chicago at WGCI in Chicago, which is the #1 station in Chicago. I remember the day that they introduced him to the airwaves in Chicago. I was sitting in my car, still living with my parents, sitting in my car, listening to the radio, and I remember hearing Doc Jones, and he was just the coolest DJ I'd ever heard in my life. He was the it man to me. And so I called this radio station on a Saturday morning, and Doc Jones answered the phone. Now, he didn't say, this is Doc Jones. He just said, hello, Magic 108. And I said, I'd like to speak to the program director. Now, I know better than what I'm doing. It's Saturday morning. Program directors don't work on Saturday mornings. And Doc Jones goes, he's not in. And so I said, okay, thank you. And I hung up. When I hung up, I said, man, that sounds like Doc Jones. And so I called back. So Doc answered the phone again. He goes, Magic 108. I said, excuse me. I said, is this Doc Jones? And he said, yes, it is. And when he said, yes, it is, I almost went into groupie mode. Oh, my God. No. Oh, my God. I can't believe it's you. Yeah. Oh, no. I was like, oh, man, okay. I was like, well, listen. I said, I'm Bob Coleman. I'm working in Albany, Georgia. And I heard you guys were looking to hire a guy at the station there in St. Louis. And I said, and I just wanted to talk to Mike, or to the program director. And so he said, well, the program director's name was Mike Stratford. He goes, Mike Stratford. He said, Mike is not here. He's hanging out with, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He was hanging out with a record promoter who worked for Motown. He was a record promoter for Motown Records. Jimmy. He said Jimmy Mack. That's his name. And so he said, Mike is hanging out with Jimmy Mack. There's a music event going on in Chicago, and Mike is hanging out with Jimmy Mack. I said, okay. I said, well, thank you very much. So I hung up. So once I hung up, I remember I knew Jimmy Mack from Motown because Jimmy Mack used to bring. Yeah, Jimmy Mack, he was a record promoter for Motown, and he used to bring the music that we played on WLTH. He would bring the music out to our radio station. So I knew Jimmy Mack. And so when Doc Jones said he was with Jimmy Mack, I had Jimmy Mack's phone number. Now, again, I hadn't talked to any of these people in years. And so I called Jimmy Mack's number, and his wife answered the phone. I said, can I speak to Jimmy Mack? She goes, he's not here. I said, this is Bob Coleman. I'm calling from Albany, Georgia. I said, can you please have him give me a call? This is very important. And so she said, okay, Bob, when he gets home, I'll let him know. So later on that evening, remember, guys, don't lose sight of what we're talking about here. I'm just not sharing a story. I'm answering a question on, having the mindset of faith, how faith works, how you have to get out of your own way, and how you're going to, faith requires you doing things that don't make sense. This is what we're talking about. So later on that evening, Jimmy Mack, he gave me a call. And again, we're playing catch up. Bob Coleman, where are you? Man, I haven't heard from you in years. What you doing? Where you at? I said, man, I'm in Albany, Georgia. I'm program director of this radio station WQD in Albany, Georgia. Oh, okay, man. Okay, how they treat you down there? You know how people talk on the phone.
Yep.
So I said, look, Mike. I said, Jimmy. I said, the reason why I'm calling you. I said, are you hanging out with a guy named Mike Stratford? He go, yeah. He said, me and Mike was together today. We had this music event going on in Chicago. He said, I'll see him tomorrow. I said, do me a favor, Mac. I said, put in a good word for me. Tell him you know me. I want to apply for the radio station there in St. Louis. He said, Bob, I got you. He said, I'll see Mike tomorrow. We're having breakfast in the morning. He said, I'll drop your name with him and I got you. I said, okay, cool. So that's what Jimmy Mack did. And so that Monday, um, Mike Stratford called me because Jimmy Mack dropped my name. That Monday morning, Mike Stratford calls me on the phone. He goes,
Mm-hmm.
"Hi, this is Mike Stratford, Magic One Way in St. Louis." I'm like, yes, sir. I said, I'm Bob Coleman. I heard you guys are looking to hire somebody here in St. Louis. I'm program director of this radio station here in Albany. I like to send you my resume, send you my audition tape. And he said, okay, Bob, send me the information. I'll take a look at it, review it, yada, yada. And so I told Mike, I said, Mike, I said, listen, I said, you're a program director in St. Louis. I said, I'm a program director here in Albany, Georgia. I said, do me a favor. He said, what's that? I said, don't leave me hanging. I said, if I don't get the job, please call me back and let me know I didn't get it. Either way, just don't leave me hanging. He said, okay, Bob, I'll do that. And we hung up. Now, during that time in Albany, Georgia, I discovered another person who became very significant in my life. I was at home watching TV one day, and I'm just kind of channel surfing, look for something good to watch. And I come across this guy who was preaching. And the reason why I stopped was because he looked like Richard Pryor to me. I'm like, Richard Pryor preaching? So I stopped to see who it was. It wasn't Richard Pryor. It was Frederick K.C. Price.
Yep.
And so I'm like, wow. And so that's when I discovered K.C. Price. And K.C. Price was talking about faith and, you know, you got to have faith. And so K.C. Price, Fred Price, he became my pastor. I would watch him every Sunday. I get up, I watch Frederick Price. I would send ties to his church to L.A. Frederick Price. He was the guy. And one of the things he taught about faith when I was in Albany, Georgia, he said, when you ask God for something, he said, don't beg and plead. He said, ask him for it. And then by faith, believe that you have received it. He said, even before it
Mm-hmm.
manifests itself, you got to act as if. Mindset, right?
Yep.
So when I applied for the job in St. Louis, after I got off the phone talking to Mike Stratford, I told God, I said, God, I said, I want to get the job in St. Louis and Magic 108. Then I thought about Fred Price, and I said, God, thank you for the job in St. Louis and Magic 108. And I immediately went out to the Piggly Wiggly. We had a Piggly Wiggly store down there.
Right.
Went out to the Piggly Wiggly store, got me some boxes, and I started packing up my apartment. Now, my friends who were with me there in Albany, Georgia, they saw what I was doing, and they were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm packing." They're like, "Where you going?" I said, "St. Louis." Now, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard from anybody, but I was just doing what Fred Price taught me to do. It didn't make sense, but I'm
Yep.
packing up my apartment. And I never will forget it. It was Memorial Day weekend. And I got my apartment packed up. Now, here's a side note for you all. Let you all know that there's nothing special about me. There's nothing different about me because here it is, Memorial Day weekend. I'm sitting in my apartment. I got boxes. I got stuff packed up. I haven't heard from anybody. My friends are looking at me like I'm crazy. They're laughing at me. And so, of course, my mind, I'm not even going to say the devil because, see, people give the devil too much credit. My mind got busy. Oh,
Yep.
you stupid. Who told you, you dumb. They're not going to hire you.
Mm-hmm.
You got to unpack this apartment, put all this stuff back. And so I started having a pity party. So I'm
Yep.
sitting in my apartment. I'm like, man, this don't make no sense. But Fred Price said, I kept saying, but Fred Price said, you got to act as if. And I never forget it. My phone rang in my apartment, Memorial Day weekend. I answered the phone. I was like, hello? And it was Mike Stratford. He goes, can I speak to Bob Coleman? I said, this is Bob Coleman. He said, hey, Bob, this is Mike Stratford, St. Louis Magic 108. I'm like, oh, okay. He said, yeah, brother. He said, I promised you that I will call you back either way. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, man, all thing I can tell you is welcome to St. Louis, welcome to Magic 108.
Right.
And that's how it happened. You know,
Hmm.
that's the foundation of bulletproof.
Right.
You have to learn how to have the mindset to get out of your own way, to do
Yep.
things that are not going to make sense, to believe that just like God is, if God is your king, his responsibility is to take care of his citizens. He's responsible for that, and you can hold his feet to the fire.
Right. And you know what? I sit here and I'm listening because it's connecting. Because we talk faith and finance Tuesday, and guys, everything that's being said is connected to the finances. You know, and you listen to the face. You listen to the part where it don't make sense.
Mhm.
And you sharing, you can hear yourself, and we say it's the enemy, but it's that piece of, I guess, all human go through it, where you have those moments of this doesn't make sense, or this stupid, like you said, this where the doubt start coming in. But
Absolutely.
how much do you think that discipline, you know, played a part into that success because on that journey?
Well, that's very important, and that's something that's going to it's going to take um, practice on your part. You're never going to be perfect. There are times when you're still going to fall back. You're going to doubt yourself. That's just a human part of you. But it takes discipline. You have to consistently tell yourself. Sometimes you got to tell that little dummy that lives inside of all of us to shut up and sit down. I threaten my dummy sometimes with not eating, and I'm not talking about fasting. I'm just talking about if my dummy starts telling me dumb things, I'll say, you know what? If you say one more word, we're not eating today. And that dummy
Right.
be like, whoop. You have to play. You have to acknowledge that it's there because guess what? It's there. But we tell
Hmm.
ourselves, well, we give ourselves permission to be to do stupid things. We give
Yep.
ourselves permission to not do things that we should do. And again, I tell people, if it doesn't make sense, you're probably headed in the right direction. God says in his word, he says, I am a jealous God, put no God before me. Now, when we read that right away, we think of, you know, Zeus and all these Greek gods. And it's easy to point to that and say, well, I follow God's order, God's commandment, because I didn't put
Yep.
those gods before him. But he wasn't necessarily talking about Zeus. That's too easy. Any of those gods, any of those Greek gods, that's too easy. The God he was talking about? He was talking about the God of the GPS. Because when you get in your car and you can be in a strange city or you're going somewhere that you've never gone before, what do? You put the coordinates, you tell the GPS where you want to go, and that
Hmm.
GPS tells you exactly what to do. And blindly, you do it. You don't
Right.
question it. You don't say, well, GPS, before I turn, give me a sign, I'm going in the right direction. You just do exactly what that GPS tells you to do, right? And no luck needed, you arrive at your destination.
Yep.
No luck needed. And so God is the same way. You get on a plane to fly somewhere. You're going miles and miles and miles up in the sky in a metal tube. You don't know nothing about the guy that's flying the plane, but you sit down with the faith that that guy knows what he's doing.
Yep.
And you're so faithful that he knows what he's doing. You will tell a person, listen, I'm in St. Louis, but I'm going to be in LA at 5 o'clock. That's how much faith you have.
Hmm.
I'm landing at 5 o'clock. Says who? But when God tells you, when God shows you something, God said, why I got to give you proof all the time? Why I always got to give you a sign? And it don't have to be that extreme. Let's even go as far as saying you go to a restaurant, you sit down and you order a meal. I've never seen a person at a restaurant break out with a bucket of soapy dishwater and a towel to wash their utensils before they stick it in their mouth.
Hmm.
But you go to a restaurant, you pick up that fork, you stick it in your mouth, not knowing who had it before you. If the
Yep.
person in the back cleaned it right, cleaned it properly, you know what that's called? That's called faith. That's
And
called blind faith. So God says, give me, I want some of that. What you doing, show me some of that. But when it comes to God, God got to give us a sign. He got to, turn on, God, you want me to do this, you got to turn the sky orange in the morning. Make a bird sing a certain tune. No, don't work that way.
right. Well, why you think most people are like that though when it comes to because I watch you follow God. I like watch you do like big time. I
Mhm.
watch you start bulletproof. You told me about your police story with the Bible and stuff like that.
Mhm.
What make you think people just not want to listen?
It's just years, and it's generation. We pass down from generation to generation to generation. There's a story. It's a story for example purposes. The young girl. I don't know if you heard it before, but there's a young girl. She's in this Thanksgiving, and she's in the kitchen watching her mother prepare the pot roast for Thanksgiving dinner. And before her mother puts the pot roast in the pan, her mother cuts off the end of the pot roast and puts it in the pan, puts it in the oven. So the little girl says, "Mama, why did you cut the end of the pot roast off before you put it in the pan?" And so the mother says, "Oh, child, when I was a little girl, my mother did that, and it was Thanksgiving, so everybody was over at the house." So the mother says, "Go in the other room. Your grandmother's in there. Go ask her." So the little girl goes in the next room and she goes, "Grandma, uh, why did you cut the end of the pot roast off before you put it in the pan and put it in the oven when mama was a little girl?" And so grandmother said, "Oh, child, when I was a little girl, that's where my mother did it. And so I just carried on to the next generation. Your great grandmother's in there. Go in there and ask her." So the little girl went to ask her great grandmother. And she said,
Hmm.
"Great grandma," she said, "why did you cut the end of the pot roast off and put it in the pan before you put it in the oven?" And her great grandmother said, "Oh, because child, back then the pan that I was using was too small and the pot roast." See, and here we are,
Uh-huh.
2 or 3 generations later, still cutting the end of a pot roast off of a pan that fits perfectly well. It's called generational information. We pass it down
Right.
from generation to generation to generation, and somebody's got
Yeah.
to be willing to break it.
Yeah. Yeah. You sure right. I'm telling you, everything you saying so far, we've been talking about this all week. I mean, all month since I started the podcast. Somebody got to be willing to break the generational curse. You
Absolutely.
know. Hey, you talking about that pot roast. I'm sitting here thinking about my daughter Deneen. I'm making my tuna, and I always, if I got 3 cans, I'll make 4 eggs. And one day she was asking me, she like, Dad, so I'm supposed to put 4 eggs with the 3 cans of tuna? I said, no, you can put 3 eggs if you like. She said, well, why are you always putting the 4 eggs in there? I said, because I eat one.
See, if she would have passed that on to her, it would be 3 generations ago. They'd be still putting 4 eggs. You know,
Right.
but that's what we do, man. And it's hard to break.
Yep.
It's hard to break. When my father passed, I'm Robert Coleman the third, and I'm not gonna get spooky and mystical and any of that, but I can just tell you, when my father died, I remember the morning or the night that he died, and I woke up the next morning, and it was a figure sitting like on the end of my bed, and I looked, and I said, I wasn't afraid, and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "You know who I am." And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm Lack." And I'm like, "What?" And I remember saying, I've always said, it's no secret that I've always been the one saying that I was going to be the one who break the generational lack curse in our family. When my father died, I eulogized my father at his funeral, and I stood in my father's casket, and I told my father, I said, "You're the last Robert Coleman that's going into the ground as a poor man." I said, "I love you, Daddy. Thank you for being my daddy. And thank you. You were a great dad, but you're the last Robert Coleman going into the ground as a poor man. I said that to my father.
Mm-hmm.
His spirit heard me. And so the next morning he said, "You know who I am." And so he said, "I just want you to know I'm not going nowhere." He said, I've been here for generations and I'm going to continue to be here. And I remember saying, "No," I said, "You getting up out of here." And I just kind of woke up. It was probably a dream. But that's what it takes. You got to be willing. First of all, you got to realize that there is a situation that needs to be dealt with. And God says it in his word. In his word. See, we're so busy fighting over skin color, racism, and God says it. God said it's a spiritual battle. This
Mm-hmm.
battle is not about flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. And you got to be willing to take on this spiritual battle mentally, spiritually, get out of your own way. You got to be able to tell yourself that you were wrong
Yep.
and be able to accept that. I've told myself many a time that I was wrong. I made the wrong decision, you know, and I've corrected it. And so you move forward because all it takes is, as a citizen of God's kingdom, that's all it takes. So people may ask, well, what does it take to be a citizen? Just got to be born.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get and I'll just ask you a question, Marlon. Did you get a stimulus check from the government?
Did I get a citizenship? Nope.
No, a stimulus check.
Oh, stimulus check. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. What did it take? What did you have to do to get that stimulus check? What was
Just
the
be a
requirement?
citizen.
Huh?
Be a citizen of the United States.
And how did you become a citizen of the United States?
I was born here.
There you go. That's
That's
all it
it.
takes. And so
Yep.
to be a citizen of God's kingdom, Jesus said, you just got to be born again. You got to be
Mm-hmm.
born into his kingdom. And all that takes is acceptance on your part.
Right.
Once you do that, now you have all rights and all privileges. And that's why I tell people success is based on God's laws and not luck. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
you weren't lucky to get your stimulus check. You expected to get it because you were born in the United States.
Yep.
So it's the same thing when it comes to God's kingdom. And once you realize that and say, you know what, I have all rights and all privileges. And because here's what the king does. The king, he provides out of his wealth, not out of yours. He'll provide out of now. I'll give you an example about what I mean by that. When I say the better way of putting it is that the king, he provides out of his level of wealth. And so let's just say, for instance, Marwin, um, you got an invitation to come down to the embassy suite for a meeting, okay? And they got a phone call and said, Marwin, we want you to come down to the embassy suites for a meeting, and tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, right? You would get up, prepare yourself, and based on your means, not saying that they're bad, but just based on your car, your whatever it is you're using to get there, that's how you would get there.
Right.
However, if the president or some high polluting person or some billionaire said, Marwin, I'm going to send a car to pick you up in the morning to bring you down to the embassy suites. What kind of car would you expect to be out there? It wouldn't be a hoopty, right? Because
That's
some
right.
billionaire is sending you, he said, I'm going to
Yeah.
send a car to pick you up. So right away, you're going to be thinking it's going to be a nice car because,
Yep.
right? And so when the king does something, and I'll give an example about that, without going into the long drawn out story, but I had an idea and it was about helping other people a few years ago. It was two people that I met and I just decided to help both of them. You know, I had I had no dog in the fight. One of the people she owned, her name was Pat Zelmer, and she owned the Buffalo Wild Wings in Cape Girardeau. I met her, and the other one is Ozzie Smith, the baseball player. He and I became friendly. And so when I met Pat Zelmer, I asked her, I said, Pat, how would you like to have a, a book signing event at your restaurant? She goes, oh, that'd be great. She said, who do you have in mind? I said, Ozzie Smith. So Ozzie had just written a book because he had just gotten inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I was over at his house one Saturday hanging out, and I said, "Hey, Ozzy," I said, "You ever thought about doing a book signing for your book?" He said, "No, Bob, I hadn't really thought about that." He goes, "Wow, what you got in mind?" I said, "I met this lady at Cape Girardeau. She owns the Buffalo Wild Wings, and I think it'd be great if you go in there and do a book signing." He goes, "Okay, put it together." And so that's what I did. And so
Uh huh.
my idea, you know, the way I did it, I'm like, well, me and Ozzy, we got to get from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau. And so I don't know if you know Tim, but Tim, he lived there in St. Louis. Tim and his wife, they owned he had one car. He had limousine service. He had one car. And so I called Tim and I said, Tim, I said, I got a contract for you. I said, me and Ozzy, we need to go from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau on this Saturday. Need you to drive us. I said, and Pat Zelmer, who owns the Buffalo Wild Wings, she's gonna pay for it. So I told him, I
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm not asking you to do me no favor. I'm not asking for a hookup because she's paying for it. And I told him, I said, and whatever you charge her for it, that's between you and her. That was my exact words to him. He said, okay. And, they put that together. And a week before the event was to take place, the king got involved. And the king was like, nah, that's cool what you're doing, but as a king, I do things at a higher level. And so about a week before, that Saturday, I got a call from Tim. He goes, Bob. He said, this is Tim. I said, okay. He said, listen. He said, I got one of my regular clients. Because remember, Tim owns the limousine service. He said, I
Mm-hmm.
got one of my regular clients in the back of the limousine. He lives in Cape Girardeau. He owns a string of nursing homes in Cape Girardeau. And he heard about, Ozzy coming to Cape. That's the talk of the town. And I told him that I knew the guy putting it together, which was you. And he wants to talk to you. I said, okay. He said, hold on a minute. So he hands this guy, Tim, the phone. His name is John. He hands John the phone. John Sells is his name. And so John Sells gets on the phone. He goes, hey, Mr. Coleman, how you doing? I said, fine. He goes, my name is John Sells, and I live in Cape Girardeau, and I understand that you're the gentleman that's responsible for bringing Ozzy to town Saturday. I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, well, Mr. Coleman, I got two little boys. It'd be great. It would be great if I could get an autographed ball signed for my two little boys from Ozzy. I said, yes, sir. I said, we can make that happen, no problem. He said, thank you, I appreciate that. He goes, Mr. Coleman, now, I don't mean to step a bounds to them, but I'd like to ask you, how are you and Ozzy planning on getting from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau? I said, Tim is going to drive us in his car. He's going to drive us there. He said, okay. He said, again, I don't mean to overstep my bounds. Now, here comes the king. He goes, Mr. Coleman, I'd like to offer you and Ozzy the use of my private jet for the day.
Right.
And that's how we got from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau that day was on private jet. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't one of these preachers talking about the congregation needs to buy me a jet. You follow me?
Yep.
I'm not saying, y'all, I need a jet. I didn't need no jet, but because that's how the king is going to give you what he knows you need, and it's going to be based on his ability, not your ability. You
Yep.
follow me? And that's why I tell people,
Yep.
you don't worry about money. Money shouldn't be your goal. You worry, but what you do is whatever it is that you say you want to do, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You don't need the money, first of all, because as a citizen of God's kingdom, it's his responsibility. Did you hear what I said? It's his responsibility to provide for his citizens. He has to. Why?
Yep.
Because we have his image on us.
Right. So we just got to step out in faith.
Absolutely. We have his image. If your cell phone, if your computer breaks down, right? And like I'm looking at my computer right now, my computer says Dell, so it's a Dell computer. If I buy a brand new Dell computer, I open it up. The first thing in that computer before I get to the computer is a booklet, owner's manual, and I started reading the owner's manual. In the back, one of those pages in that owner's manual says this. It says if if this computer does not function the way that we know it should, put it back in the container and send it back to us at our expense. We'll pay for the shipping and everything. Send it back to us, and what we'll do is we will either repair it or replace it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're standing 100% behind their product. How do I know it's their product? Because it has their image on it, because it says Dell.
Right,
You
right,
gotta ask yourself, why is Dell doing? You think Dell is doing it because they like me? No. You think Dell is willing to, pay for my posting, send me another computer, make it right because they trying to impress me? No, they don't even know me. So why do they have all of those elements in place? Because Dell is standing behind their product,
right.
because their image is on their product.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever they say their product should be able to do, that's what it's supposed to do, or there's a problem. We are made in the image of who?
Oh, oh God. You're supposed to
You
have
follow
it.
this?
You're supposed to be stamped by the
Absolutely. And
blood.
so,
Yep.
absolutely. And so everything that's in that Bible, see, people think that God is a, and I know I'm gonna get in trouble for this because again, here comes the mindset. You got to change your mindset. But people think that God is a religious being. God is a business. God is about business. He's about business.
Mm-hmm.
He has laws, and he's about business. As a matter of fact, uh, in Luke 2:49, when little boy Jesus, right,
I think we lost you. Think we lost you there for a second, Bob. You froze up on us.
and his parents, in, no, I got you
Yeah, we got you back. You
on my
back.
phone.
Yep, you back.
Jesus, the little boy Jesus said, "Didn't you all talking to Mary and Joseph? Didn't you all know I would be here?" And what was he saying he would be doing? Been going about my father's what?
Father's business.
Father's
Yep.
business.
Yep.
He
Being
wasn't
about his
teaching
business.
religion. He wasn't teaching religion. He was now when God sent Moses to talk to fulfill his mission, or to fulfill his will. When God sent Moses to fulfill his will, who did he send Moses to? A king. He didn't send
Yep.
Moses to the religious leaders. He didn't send Moses to, now I want you to go talk to all the priests and tell them this is what they need to do. He said, no, this is politics. This is a kingdom to kingdom. So you go tell Pharaoh to let my
Mm-hmm.
people go. That's politics all day long. But you gotta
Right.
change your mindset. You gotta see this thing for what it really and truly is. And once you do that, you'll never be the same.
Yeah, I know that's right. Yep. I learned it, the older I get, the more it's about mindset, and the more that I take the what I want to say, the challenge on becoming better in life.
Hmm.
It starts right up here. It
Absolutely.
starts right up here. You know, uh, let me ask you this: when it comes to your journey that you've been on, right? Again, we go back from radio, police officer, the play, big time, um, even to doing bulletproof right now, being the
Hmm.
CEO of bulletproof.
Hmm.
Personal development.
Hmm.
How much did personal development play? What type of role?
100% huge. That's a part of it. If you are your own professor, you got a dummy for a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You have to read books. You have to sit up under other people. You have to be willing to open yourself up to information that may not be in line with what your thinking is. That's how you learn. You have to be willing to learn.
Yep.
So personal development was a huge part. And working in the industry of multi-level marketing, and again, that's not something I was looking to get involved in. I was a police officer when I was introduced to multi-level marketing. And I tell people all the time, when I signed up for it just really to help out my friend. That was my mindset. When my
Mm-hmm.
friend asked me to buy a membership of prepaid legal from him to sign up for prepaid legal, I said, if I here's exactly what I asked him. I said, if I get this membership, will it help you? He said, yeah. I said, okay, give me a membership. This was my mindset, man. Just give me a membership. And I never will forget it. I was sitting on the Taco Bell on Skinker in Delmar by U City. I was
Mm-hmm.
sitting at that Taco Bell working secondary, off duty security for Taco Bell when I signed up for prepaid legal. But my mindset was I was helping him. And he invited me to a meeting, a prepaid legal meeting, and man, they have meetings on Thursday, whatever night they had the meeting. And I went to that meeting and I sat there and I watched these people, these videos, and they showing all this stuff and people with their tuxedos on and big checks and I leaned over to my friend. I said, "Man, I said if this is real, I said I'm gonna blow this thing up. I said if it's fake, everybody getting locked up because I was a cop at the time." And we laughed. And about
Mm-hmm.
a year and some change later, after sitting in that first meeting, a year and some change later, I found myself in Las Vegas with a tuxedo on stage, getting a big check.
Wow.
And so that's when I realized that the only thing that that industry does is it just gives you the opportunity to make what you think you're worth. That's
Right.
it. No promises.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What was some of the biggest lessons that you learned in multi-level marketing? Because
well,
I think those lessons that we can learn from multi-level marketing kind of spills over to almost every part of our lives. Communication. If you're being an entrepreneur, you know, I think those you can learn some things in that industry.
mhm.
What were
well,
some of the
one
biggest lessons?
one of the biggest lessons I learned in multiple marketing, I learned who I wasn't, and
Mm.
that was a humbling. That was very humbling because remember, you know, before multiple marketing, I was on the radio, and so I was used to being again the man. You know,
Mm-hmm.
at the concert, I was the guy on stage in front of thousands of people introducing somebody else or some other group or whatever. But that was my thing. That was my platform. And so once I got introduced to multi-level marketing, I saw other people on stage, and what amazed me was none of these people had ever been on radio. None of these people had never recorded a song. They weren't recording artists. They weren't movie stars. They weren't famous athletes. They were just regular Moes and Joes who had said yes to an opportunity. And because they said yes to the opportunity and got out of their own way, their total lives changed. And I was
Mm-hmm.
amazed. I was totally amazed to see young African American. I remember the first prepaid legal event that I went to, and I see these young African American young men walking across the stage getting $100,000 rings like popcorn. I'm like, wait a minute, you know, dressed in suits and ties and cufflinks and French cuffs, and I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy because I never
Right.
experienced anything like that, and so it taught me again. It showed me who I wasn't, and but it also taught me that you know what I said. You know what? That's when I really started thinking, if it is to be, it's up to me, because everything that I had done before that, it was I was it was I'd been given the permission to do that by someone else. I
Mm-hmm.
always had somebody over me, or in radio. I had a program director. He told me what time I'd be on the air, what time I'd be off the air. He told me what music I could play on the air, what records I could play off the air. He controlled all that. As I was on the police department, I had sergeants and lieutenants and captains. They were all over me. They told me where I could work, what district I could work in. They controlled me. But once I got involved with multi-level marketing for the first time in my life, I was in total control. When I met John Sales, the guy who lent me his jet for the day, that was, again, I didn't really finish the end of the story on, because when I connected Ozzie Smith with Pat Zelmer, I never asked Ozzie for a dime. when it comes to his book
Mm-hmm.
sales. I didn't say, now, Ozzy, I'm putting this together. So, you sell a lot of books that day. You have to break me off
Oh,
something. I never
I know
said
that's
that.
right. Where my cut at?
Right. When Pat Zelma with the Buffalo Wild Wings, I didn't say, now, Pat. And let me tell you, when we got to that Buffalo Wild Wings in Cape Girardeau, it were hundreds, I almost said thousands, but it was hundreds of people standing in line waiting to meet Ozzie Smith. Pat Zelma's restaurant ran out of chicken that day. The
Wow.
news, the news media was there from Cape Girardeau. It was an incredible event. I never once went to Pat Zelma and say, "Now, Pat, you sold a lot of chicken. Break me off a little something." I didn't say that. But because the king always takes care of his citizens. At the end of the day, John Sales asked me, he said, "Bob, what do you do?" He said, "Bob, what do you do, Bob Cole?" And I told him, I said, "Oh, I'm with this company called Prepaid Legal." And he said, "Prepaid Legal, I think I heard of it." He said, "Call my office Monday. I want to talk to you about that Prepaid Legal." And so that Monday morning, I called John Sales' office, and make a long story short, we met a few days later in his office, and he
Mm-hmm.
signed up for prepaid legal with me, and he made prepaid legal part of his employee benefit package. And
Wow.
300 employees. So
Wow.
that one day, the day he signed that card in his office, that moment, that day, I made $18,000 in one day.
One day. Wow.
So that's when I knew it was real, because I made $18,000 in one day, and it all stemmed from an idea that I had. I didn't have to ask anybody's
Mm-hmm.
permission. I had to get approval, but at the same time, I had to stay out of my own way, and I never went to I never attempted to award myself.
Right.
I leave that to the king,
Yep.
because if I had talked to Pat and said, "Pat, break me off something," I guarantee you, she would not have written me a check for $18,000.
Mm-hmm.
If I had told Ozzy, break me off something, Ozzy wasn't gonna write me no check for $18,000.
Yep.
But because I didn't, the king
Mm-hmm.
said, "Here's what you get."
Yep.
That's the law. That's how it works.
Yeah. I know I talked to the church, and y'all correct me. I know I got some of the people on here from the church. Y'all correct me, but I can't remember if it was on a Sunday or if it was in faith and finance. But I always tell them, you have to ask yourself, what value am I bringing? Can I bring somebody else value? Instead of what can you do for me? What type
Absolutely.
of what type of value can I bring to somebody else? And I think that leads to, like you said, God moving, God's kingdom. God gonna take care of you anyway. You know.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. That's the way it works. When I came here to Arizona, I didn't know a soul. Now, of course, in St. Louis, I knew everybody. Being on radio, police officer, who did not know in St. Louis? But when I came here to Arizona, I didn't know a soul, but I still wanted to have my bulletproof event.
Mm-hmm.
And I never will forget the first year that I decided to have it. I wanted to get some T-shirts made for my event with my logo on them. I didn't know anybody in Arizona. I didn't know how to get any T-shirts made, who to call, whatever. And I remember picking a guy up at the airport, and we were talking and having a conversation. And I was telling him about bulletproof. Yeah, yeah. So I asked him, I said, "Sir, what do you do?" And he said, "Oh," he said, "I'm the general manager of one of the largest T-shirt manufacturers here in Arizona."
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh man, I need you." And he said, "No problem, Bob. Come to my office." A couple of days later, I went to his office. He showed me his plant. I mean, this guy, he does T-shirts for the NBA and major corporations.
Mm-hmm.
This T-shirt plant was huge. They made millions of T-shirts. And he said, "Well, Bob, I got you. How many T-shirts do you need for your event?" And I was like, 10, no.
Right.
But but I got them done.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn how to, again, get out of your own way. God is going to
Right.
provide for whatever it is you need to do. God's going to provide. You just have the idea. One year, I don't think you were here that year, but I had the idea for my bulletproof event. And I said, "You know what?" I said, "I think I want to do At lunchtime, I want to have a pizza party for everybody that attends. Now, again, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
How are you
Yep.
going to
Yep.
have a pizza party for everybody that attends? Who's going to pay for the pizzas,
Yeah.
right?
That was last year, wasn't it?
No, it was the year before last.
Okay.
I think it
Okay.
was the year before last, a couple years ago. But who's going to pay for these pizzas? But the king is always, see, here's the deal. The king, just like the Dell Corporation, he's going to make sure that his product does what it was supposed to do. He's going to provide the way because that's what he does. And so all I had was the idea. And my idea was, I said, well, I know I'm going to get the pizzas from Costco because they had just opened up a Costco here in Buckeye. It was brand new. And I said, I'm going to get my pizzas from Costco.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't doing no fundraiser. I wasn't doing no GoFundMe. I wasn't asking for sponsorship. I just said I'm going to do it. And people look at me, how are you going to do that? Man, you have these bright ideas, right? I met this gentleman and his wife. We were having a conversation one morning. And I told him about the bulletproof and everything. And we mentioned he mentioned Costco. The gentleman I was talking to mentioned Costco. And I said, "Oh, I said you just reminded me, sir." I said I got to renew my Costco membership. I said because there's a new Costco that just opened up in Buckeye where I live. I said, and I'm having a pizza party this year at my event at lunchtime. I said, and guess where I'm getting all my pizzas from? And he said, Costco. And we laughed. And so I said, yep. And so a few minutes later, he looks at me. He goes, Bob. He said, he said, I know the general manager. He said, my son works at that Costco in Buckeye. He says, I know the general manager of Costco. He said, Bob, give me one of your bulletproof cards. I gave him my card. He said, here's what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to call the general manager of Costco. He said, Bob, don't worry about the pieces. It's on us. You get as
Wow.
many as you want.
Yep. That's God. Yep.
You can't make this stuff up. I tell
Yep.
people that's the way you do it
Yeah.
consistently.
Yep.
Now, are you going to have butterflies in your stomach? Yep.
Yep.
Are you going to be nervous? Yep.
Yep.
Don't let me sit up here and make you all think that I got it all. Oh, so that's easy for Mr. Coleman to say because no. There are gonna be days when you be like, oh Lord, what did I just do?
Right.
Well, the key is you be bulletproof, which means what? You don't quit, you don't
Mm-hmm.
stop, and you don't give up. You just keep
Yep.
going, and it has to happen.
Yep.
100%.
Yep. Hey, time to went by really, really fast. I got a couple more. I got one question I want to ask you real quick. You can give a quick response to the people that's watching. But if you had to say something to those who are watching tonight and says, hey, you know what? I want to change. I want to be better. I want to prosper. But I've been thinking the same way for 20, 30 years. What would you tell that person? What would be the first thing you say? Here's your first step. What would you tell them?
First step is this: stop being afraid of being the oddball. Stop being afraid of being the different one in your family. Everybody in my family, we think this way. Well, I don't. I don't think that.
Mm-hmm.
Stop being afraid to being that person. Stop being afraid of if I think this way, I might lose some friends. If you lose any friends, they weren't your friends anyway. People are in your life for a season, and then I've got friends that, I can still consider them a friend, but I outgrew them.
Right.
I was willing to go somewhere where they weren't, and so I just keep it moving.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what you have to do. You have to, again, get out of your own way. Stop being afraid. Well, I don't want to hurt nobody's feelings. It's not about hurting nobody's feelings. And as you keep living, here's what you're going to realize. And I'm at that point. I got my membership card. And I tell people all the time, anybody I haven't impressed, I won't impress.
I know that's
You know,
right.
I
Yeah, I
don't give
know that's right.
a hoot about impressing anybody because I know from where my help comes from. I know that I'm a citizen of God's kingdom with all rights and privileges. And every day, you want to learn more about your citizenship. If I can, Mom, real quick, it's just sitting right here on my desk. If you have a passport and just doing my studies, I opened up my passport, and on the front cover of the passport, being a citizen of the United States, Here's what it says. It says, this is the very first page. This is my passport right here. And I'm reading the first page. It says, the Secretary of State of the United States of America hereby requests all who it may concern to permit the citizen of the United States named herein to pass without delay or hindrance, and in case of need, to give all lawful aid and protection.
Mm.
Now, that's what my passport says. So if I go to a foreign country and they see this, they know it's not about me, it's about this. Because they
Right.
know if we mess with him, these people coming.
Right.
It's the same thing when it comes to God's kingdom. Jesus said it.
Yeah.
Jesus said, "Don't you realize when Jesus' life was threatened? Don't you know I could kill you?" What was Jesus? Jesus said, "Don't you know I could call for a legion of angels?"
Yep.
And he wasn't talking about the pretty little angels with the white robes and the pretty little feathers, wings on their back. He was talking about war. If they said if you ever saw a war angel, a warrior, you would faint. He was
Mm-hmm.
called the big boys, and he said
Right.
legion of them. He said, but
Yep.
I didn't come here for that. I came here for something else. So let's get on with what I came here to
You know that's right. No, that's right. Yes, sir.
do.
The
Yeah,
kingdom citizenship.
absolutely.
Yep.
Get the
Having
citizen,
the mindset of the king.
and it's
Yep.
fun. I mean, once you become a citizen, hey, man, let me ask you this. And I know we run out of time. But let me ask you: do you remember back when I was in St. Louis and I had those gas cards?
Yep.
Remember those gas cards I had? And
Yep.
way back then, when I had those gas cards, I remember saying to myself, I said, I don't care how much gas go up. I'm gonna always have enough money to pay for it.
I remember that.
And to this day, I had a friend of mine not too long ago. We were talking about different things. He still lives in St. Louis, and he asked me. He said, "Bob," he said, "how much is the gas prices in Arizona?" And I said, "I'm not trying to be funny." I said, "But I don't know because I don't know." I said, "When I go to gas station, I just go fill up my tank and I leave. I don't, why? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm a king. I'm a citizen of God's kingdom with all rights and
Right.
privileges."
Yep.
Now, with that comes responsibility. It's not being helter skelter. It's not being carefree. There are things you have to learn. And so, what I would say is get up under a leader like Pastor Dare. Get up and plug in the bulletproof on Friday mornings. Come to the bulletproof event in October. You're going to be blown away. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be right here in Arizona in October, October 10th. Come to Bulletproof and get up under people that you can learn from. You got to get away from all of those religious people that are keeping you held down, keeping
Yep.
you sick, keeping you broke, keeping you tired, keeping you climbing up the rough side of the mountain when God never said climb up the rough side. He said, speak to it and it shall be removed.
That's right. Yep.
So that's it. That's what I would tell you.
All right. All right. Well, that's some good stuff. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for all that encouraging and the wisdom and knowledge and all that. Hey guys, I hope y'all was listening to it and just like I said, we know this is Faith and Finance Tuesday, but everything that we talked about has something to do with where we're going, right? Hey Bob, before you leave, I know you mentioned bulletproof. You want
Mhm.
to share the phone number
Sure.
with the Friday call
Yeah, on
and
Friday
just
morning,
tell.
yeah, Friday mornings, it's 9 o'clock Arizona time, actually. And all you do is you dial 253-993-3111. That's area code 253-993 3111. Dial that number at 9 a.m. Arizona time. It's a 30-minute call, and you'll get more information like this. We keep it real on Friday mornings. It's just 30 minutes. And of course, if you want to come to the Bulletproof event, it's going to be Saturday, October the 10th, here in Arizona at the Hilton Convention Center in Scottsdale. Awesome location. And guess what? This year, God told me to take care of everybody's tickets, to pay for the whole thing, myself. And so that's what we're doing. Tickets are absolutely at no cost to you. All you have to do is go to Eventbrite to register. Go to Eventbrite, put in Bulletproof, Dream Big, Live Bold. The ticket landing will come up. You get your tickets, and the VIP gold tickets include lunch included,
All right.
all on me.
Hey,
And
Pastor AT, are you catching that? Because Pastor AT normally puts everything up in the chat for everybody. And so if you caught that, the phone number,
yeah,
he
area
gonna
code
put
253-993-3111. And for Bulletproof Event, go to eventbrite.com and put in Bulletproof, Dream Big, Live Bold. And we'd love to see you guys out here in October 10th.
All right, appreciate it. Hey, we had a good time last year. You know, I didn't know what to expect, and that was my first year going last year, and it was a real good time. We had some great speakers, you know, motivational, motivating, you know, got you fired up, ready to do something. So no, like he always said, you got to be bulletproof on this journey.
Absolutely.
You know, you got to be bulletproof. So Bob, I appreciate you. I appreciate you a whole lot. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to try to get that information up there for you guys, because I encourage you, if you can, make sure you get on that call. The call every Friday and dropping nuggets. You know, if you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to grow personally, get your business going, you want to get on the call. So we should have that number coming up real soon there for you guys. All right. And to everybody that's watching tonight, hey, if the conversation encouraged you and challenged you to continue to develop your mind to prosper, if you have any questions, again, if you have any financial questions, I'm going to share my QR code for you. Faith and Finance, and you can scan the QR code. Just simply scan it, and you can set up your complimentary financial checkup. You know, and what we'll do, we'll sit down together, we'll discuss your goals and answer your questions, and help you build a plan that designed for your future, not mine, but for your future, right? So if tonight's episode encouraged you, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hey, share this with somebody tonight. You know, share this with somebody that you think can use this. And like we say, remember this, work the system long enough for the harvest to show up, and measure the seeds you plant every day, because your harvest doesn't come from wishing. It comes from what? Faithful activities. Faithful activities. So I'm going to see, let's see if we got that up there in the chat. Okay, we didn't get it up there. But I will make sure that I will share that number. I get the information for you guys, and I'll make sure that I share it up from here on out until, you know, I just make sure I mention it for you. And we'll get that information so you can join Bulletproof, and the phone calls on Fridays. And you can, if you want to, I mean, guys, how many conferences you go to that's free? That the CEO say he gonna pay for the conference ticket. All you gotta do is get there. So you might want to get there. All right. So thank you all for being on, for joining us, and Bob, thank you again for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and that kingdom mindset.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Until next Tuesday. God bless.